Welcome to Abstracts. This week, faces.
Being social beings, we need to recognise each other, and we do so in all sorts of ways, by the way people move, the way they dress, their voices, where they are, but in particular, we are very good at recognising each other's faces. There are some people who are not so good at recognising faces, and in extreme cases, people may not recognise their husband, their wife, their children, their oldest friends, and they are called face-blind.
It's the hardest, I think, with my family, not to be able to personalize them. You know, it's kind of like I've lost everybody, like everyone's gone. And all that I'm really left with are facts without faces.
Police officers known as super recognisers are being used to pick out criminals and suspects in crowds.
All you can see is his eyes and the top part of his nose. From that small piece of his face, that was enough for me to say, yeah, that's Stephen Prince. We got charged on that and we went to trial.
So yeah, welcome everybody. Abstracts 4. We made it to episode 4.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 4.
I didn't think we would get past 3, but we have.
How dare you?
Yeah. I have very little faith in us. We're recording this on a Monday evening rather than our usual Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, why, Andy?
I was up late. Matthew. But I was watching the fights, so it was well worth it.
What, on the street?
No, I didn't catch those. I was watching the UFC.
Ah, okay.
I was watching the UFC, yeah.
How was it for you? I only got the highlights myself.
Oh, it was great. But, loads of far more experts in MMA will be talking about that, I'm sure, at great length in their podcasts.
Oh, I'm sure. No names given.
So we're doing this on a Monday afternoon, really? Well, evening
Well,
now.
no, I mean, it's the depth of night at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Afternoon we're talking about.
Bells of autumn. In the bells of autumn. Yeah. And today we're talking about faces. The human face, the psychology of the face. Why do we look at faces? You see, the thing was, I like this subject. It's a great, great subject. But for me, half of it is like, well, duh. You know, you ask the question, why does a human look at another human face? It kind of feels like, well, that's what we do. We're part of the species. How deep can you really dig into
why,
that?
Andy?
Why?
But why?
Why?
Come on, Andy. Why would we look at faces? Why not elbows?
Why on earth would a baby look at its mother's face? Why?
Have you never looked at an ankle and thought, yeah, that's it?
That's the thing. Yeah, so this is it, man. This why is like...
Well, it's the wrong question for science.
It's redundant to me, man.
Yeah.
This is it. And I think it's more... What's interesting about faces is how.
How? I mean, there are whys, but a lot of that exists in the whole evolutionary psychology area.
Yeah.
Where it's just theories.
Yeah.
And really we know it's to do with the fact that we are a social species.
It's got so much to do with the social brain. I mean, even just not... If you take a group of people who don't necessarily have a natural proclivity for looking at faces, like, say, people who develop autism, then you can see the importance on a social level, on an evolutionary level, why looking at faces is important. You know, it's very simple. When you remove somebody when you take into account somebody who can't observe a face, who isn't interested in looking at a face, just doesn't find it salient or worth looking at, they're far more interested in something else, then you begin to understand why a face is important, I guess. But that's really all you need. But the information that's stored in there, how do we put them together? How do we recognize people? Is it the space between all the objects? Do we see individual eyes? Do we take all the bits, or do we make a full holistic picture? That's more interesting. That's more useful. That's more measurable in a way.
And you know what? It's also interesting to see what happens when we really amp that up and we say, what happens when you can really, really recognize faces at a level that is not normal. It's abnormal, but it's in the positive direction. And then also what happens when you can't, not just in the, we're not interested in faces perspective, like someone with autism, but also when you say, well, you're face blind. And a lot of people haven't heard of face blindness. I know I've spoken to a lot of people about this and they've said, well, I didn't believe you initially. What do you mean face blind? And actually what we're not talking about is, they look at a face and they just see, nothing there.
Yeah.
They can see it.
Like
but
a
they
blanked
can't...
out face.
Yeah.
In some like horrible music video, it's just like a blanked out face.
Exactly, yeah. It's not that. They can see the face, but they can't perceive it. And a lot of people, haven't really unpacked the difference between seeing and perceiving, sensing and perceiving. In psychology, sensation and perception are two fundamentally different things. So that's a really interesting point. What happens when perception doesn't work properly?
But before we get into that, should we talk about the gin we're drinking?
Absolutely. So the Roku gin. This is an interesting one. I picked it up. It's a Japanese gin, and we're serving it with ginger.
Yes.
Wow. Have you got just ginger as well? Because you
I've
go for
just
the
got
lime,
ginger.
weren't you, for a while?
I did get lime, but it was the suggestion that you drink it just with ginger.
A Japanese gin and tonic, apparently.
Hmm.
So it's very nice. How are you finding it?
I
Smooth?
like it. It's smooth, but it's also boozy.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's
Boozy.
strong.
Yeah, it's very connoisseur-like of you.
It really is.
Boozy.
It's boozy.
Yeah, no, it is. It's good. I mean, so actually, if you go on the website, they say in the nose there's cherry blossom and green tea. But yeah, boozy. Boozy's the one. With a floral and sweet aroma.
Can
I've got
you
to be
really
honest.
smell green tea?
No, I've got to be honest. I'm not seeing it. Have you got any tea bags of green tea? We should really...
No, I don't. I usually do, though, as well.
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
It would.
Yeah, some matcha, mix that in.
So we're saying green tea on the nose.
Yeah, and then complex, whatever that means. Multi-layered. These are just words, aren't they? Harmonious, apparently. Okay.
It's
this
a
is
complicated but
marketing.
harmonious balance of herbs.
Yeah, so, I mean, and the finish is the crisp Japanese sansho pepper.
Mmm.
Bringing some spiciness. I've got to be honest, I am getting a slight spiciness.
I am
Yeah.
getting some spiciness and a bit of pepperiness, but I really like the bottle.
The bottle. Yeah, you
It's
really pick on
very
the bottle,
nice.
don't you?
I'm a fan of a good bottle, man. The bottle it's important. It's an important factor
It
in the
is.
whole,
In making you buy a substandard gin.
Absolutely.
Not that we're saying this is substandard, of course.
Not at all. We have by no means drunk enough of it to call it substandard.
Absolutely.
But it is very beautifully designed, and it does look like a good purchase. If you were buying a gift, it's very gift-like, the bottle, isn't it?
Yeah, really, really nice. Really nice, really soft gin. Serve over ice.
And it's good with the
Bit of
ginger.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really good with the ginger. And I'm actually not a fan of ginger. So there you go.
Brilliant.
So,
There you go. Rocky gin.
hopefully by the end of this, we can't recognise faces either.
It's a sign of a good gin.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
So, the face as central to social identity.
Yeah?
I mean, actually, something that's quite interesting, I was looking at, if you take an evolutionary psych perspective, they tend to look at two things. Why would you select a mate? And it says when selecting mates, we look for two factors that can also be expressed in the face. Genetic heterozygosity. So basically,
In
just
English?
basically having dominant and recessive genes. So one of each from each parent.
Okay.
So, sickle cell anemia. Edit that. Sickle cell anemia? I've gone totally... Sorry.
Should we Google it?
No, sickle cell anemia.
Yeah, sickle cell anemia.
Good God.
There you go.
There we go. That's a psychological condition right there. Sickle cell anemia. You can have a dominant and a recessive gene. The dominant gene, obviously, if you have two dominant sickle cell anemia genes, or I should say alleles, not ideal, because then you're going to have sickle cell anemia. You can have one recessive, and that will give you the benefits of having sickle cell, which is also that you are protected somewhat against malaria.
Yeah, there is is it an immunity to malaria that comes with sickle cell?
Yeah,
Or
and so
that gene, that
yeah.
particular gene.
And the recessive kind of counterbalances it. So there is an advantage to being, one of each. So you don't just want two dominant, two recessive. So that's one thing we look for. We want to see that expressed in the face. And the other thing is a healthy hormone profile. What we're really looking for here is, for example, a female will rate a male as more attractive when they've, got a heterozygotic histocompatibility complex. It's just basically all jargon for saying if they can see that there's a strong immune system in their face, and that is usually linked to symmetry. So when you have had a low immune system and you've been iller when you're younger, then you'll have more asymmetry.
I've heard this before as well in terms of reproduction, that your immune system will find complementary the immune system that's opposite to it. So all the holes that you have is attracted to somebody who's putting out pheromonal information.
Yeah.
It's like attraction. And the lock and key, they're going to go together, is the idea.
One thing I thought was really interesting is, One thing I thought was really interesting is that, testosterone will basically compromise the immune system. So you might say, well, why would a female be interested in a male that is clearly high in testosterone. Big old jaw, masculine features. Well, one of the reasons, as an evolutionary psychologist would say, is that, well, that must mean they're in pretty good shape. If they can invest in secondary sexual traits like testosterone, well, testosterone will help provide those secondary sexual traits. If you can afford to have your immune system compromised in order to get them, then you must have been in pretty good nick in the first place. So this is one of the things as well, again, linked to the immune system. So if you've got a symmetrical face, that's to do with genetic heterozygosity, or can be. But then if you've got a masculine face, well, that means you've got to have a pretty good immune system to be able to afford to have it lowered by the testosterone. So those two things, symmetrical and masculine, that's linked from an evolutionary perspective. And again, this is just a theory. That's linked to immune system.
Reminds me of a statue from the Renaissance period. Someone like Heracles, just stood there, perfectly symmetrical, just muscular, bearded, but everything's
in the right
balanced
place. Yeah.
in the right place. It's like the golden section, the idea of what became beauty in art, the golden ratio.
So, I mean, that's one idea of where this comes from and why there's, when you talk about the attractiveness of the face, that apparently immune system can be in your face and you wouldn't even realise it.
So you pull to the face through pheromonal attraction. Someone's pumping something out. You find that immune system attractive for reproduction, say, and then you look at the face, and then that just supports this almost a theory of mind that's developing because of these pheromones. Not just the actions someone's doing, not just their facial expressions, but these chemicals are coming out, and it's helping you build this picture of a person in your mind.
It makes you wonder just how much of what you think about other people is linked to, what you think the reasons are. They're a good person, and I get on really well with them, and we can chat about things all night. How much of it is that, and how much of that is just you post hoc explaining the fact that you're attracted to them, which is chemical, immune system, genetic. I mean that's a pretty deterministic way of looking at it, but
you've got my immune system working overtime.
Good God, am I safe to stay? But yeah, so I mean, that's one idea of where this comes from. But like you say, what are the mechanics of it? And actually, should we talk about the developmental timelines for this?
I think that's a good place to start. Because when do we first start taking faces seriously? Because it's all very well and good, baby's born, you give it to the mother. Obviously, a neurotypical kid in any culture, whatever, as soon as the baby's born, they'll naturally want to bond, look at a face, look out for this kind of stuff.
And actually, we can say one of the real assumptions that people make is that kids that have autism will be less face-oriented when they're first born. Right. But it's not the case.
Exactly.
They'll be the same. Sometimes in studies, they'll even have more face orientation than a child that will turn out to be
That's right.
autistic.
They might overperform in certain areas as well.
Yeah, and it's only as the developmental timeline goes on that you see the disinterest in faces. So but
that's why it's so late to show itself as a condition, or why we catch it so late, or why we can only really see it so late.
Yeah, but of course you could be congenitally blind, and in that case, if you've got cataracts from birth, you ain't looking at nothing.
Yeah, that's right. That's another interesting thing. I always thought that cataracts was something that your grandma got.
Yeah, I
and like grandma's in hospital for cataracts, and it's like, okay, it's nothing serious. They're just like peeling off a layer of her eye,
Yeah, nothing serious.
Nothing serious, nothing serious. But yeah, it's interesting when we do start taking notice. We do from quite an early age look at not so much faces, but just even objects that look like faces, even just a circle with two dots where eyes should be, or a triangle where a nose should be. We do from a very early stage orientate towards these kind of images as opposed to other ones.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. These top-heavy configurations, like you say, the upside-down triangles, from birth, they're more interested in that. And there's the question, are they seeing faces, or is that just a configuration that is built in innately to the brain?
This is interesting, because if you do look at primates, they do the same thing. And obviously, I don't know, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I believe in evolution. I believe in that theory almost to the degree where I would say it is fact. I factually believe.
Well, after last episode, I'm not so sure, mate. I think that, those old Catholic texts, they had a lot going for them.
That's the thing. But there is I think some pattern here, to be fair, with our closest ancestors and us as well, because they have found in gibbons that gibbons after 13 days, or in this one particular study that I found, they took a gibbon at 13 days old, and it was very interested in drawings that were face-like. And then by about 4 weeks, it began to orientate towards its mother and other familiar conspecifics. When I say conspecific, I mean something that's like that. So it orientated.
Same
It was more
species.
interested in the same species.
I mean, when I was looking at human babies, human newborns, they, like we said, top-heavy configurations, but then also they preferred familiar faces, so familiar configurations, which might make you think, is it just configuration, or is it just is it the features as well? How can they actually recognize a face? But then also there was this thing about, and I didn't know this, the greater attendance to outer features initially, and then they move in to after maybe a couple of months.
So it's like scanning the perimeter or something, and then
Yeah.
eventually you narrow your perception
into
the centre.
You start on the outside, so you're looking at the outside, the outline of the face. The hairline is a big one. You look at the hairline. After about 2 months, you've got the inner features down as well. At that point, you can perceive the whole face pretty much. So, the entire face is presented to the baby. It's not just that they can switch between them, they can see the whole face. But initially, if you mess with the mother's hairline, then they'll think it's just a different person. So Altogether, yeah. So you mess with the hairline, so, put a hat on mum. Oh my God. I thought that was really interesting, Initially it's the outside, and then after 2 to 3 months, you get that inner feature attendance. And then also, experience is starting to affect the perceptual processing of the baby. So it starts to, if you're just showing it female nurses, the mum, the baby starts preferring female faces. That makes you think female features, not just the configuration. It's not just having those 2 dots above and 1 dot below. Now you're looking at really the features and understanding the difference between a female and a male face.
I found something similar to that with Pascalis paper in 2002.
Okay.
Is face processing species specific during the first year of life? And they found that infants absolutely eventually prefer their own species. Because what you can do is you can get a baby to look at pictures of monkeys and pictures of people. And in the very, very early, before 6 months, pre-6 months, they don't really care whether it's a monkey or a human. It's just got a face. But then post that, by about 9 months, they selectively attend to the conspecifics. This is the same for the gibbons. This is the same in Japanese macaques as well. So for me, this does directly point to some evolutionary proclivity, from our ancestors.
Makes you wonder, do you think that if you could see a spider's face and you were brought up amongst a family, let's say a family, I don't reckon they have families, evil little things, solitary. But imagine you had a family of spiders. Do you reckon you'd get used to those? You sort of look into their many eyes and go, home.
It's an interesting question, but it makes me wonder whether or not this particular thing with faces, with the information that's stored in faces, is specific to primates.
Yeah.
Because I have to wonder about cats. Even if you take a cat like a tiger, and a tiger has a cub, when that tiger's teaching the cub like the ways of the world, is that cub looking in the tiger's face? Because the social groups that tiger has to inhabit is almost non-existent. They again too are solitary animals. So the information that's stored in that face is really to do with, I don't know actually. This is just anecdotal. We're just talking anecdotally. I guess it's just a question. But there wouldn't be specific emotional information in the face except kill that thing, or there's something trying to kill us, or would they look more at the body? Would they look more at things like that?
So interestingly, my family has a dead a dead cat, I was going to say.
Is it in the closet?
Just some dead cat. No, a deaf cat. It has a deaf cat. And so initially, because actually we have many cats. You know what cats are like. They don't look at you. You can call their name and you might see their ear prick.
Yeah.
But they're just sitting there. They're like, yeah, it's cool. We know they want us, but we don't have to look at them. We don't need to do that. I've got a deaf cat. The deaf cat just stares at you in the face. It's not looking at your body. When it's dinner time, it's not looking at your hands. It's not looking at your, the way your feet are moving towards the kitchen cupboard. It's not looking at that. It's looking directly in your eyes. Well, it looks like it's in your eyes. It's hard to know. You can't really see the iris of the cat, but it might be looking. And that's the question. I don't know. This is again anecdotal, but I wonder if a deaf cat is looking at the feature, so the mouth. Is it looking at the mouth? Is it looking to make sure, because if it can't hear you, it's thinking, well, when the lips move and it's generally configurally facing towards me, that means dinner time at this time of day. Is that what it's looking for, or is the cat seeing a face? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, maybe it knows because of years of evolution, like domestic house cats. Maybe it knows that that's the best place to look.
Yeah, maybe.
Because if it wants something from you, it knows that perhaps it's not going to get anything by looking at your hands. And it knows that if it looks at your face and does that big cat eye thing...
the Puss in Boots look.
Yeah, the Puss in Boots look that they're going to get from
cute.
it. Maybe the same with dogs. Maybe there's some mammalian thing. But for the more high-level social stuff, that's like almost more to do with primates for me. I don't know that like cats would really learn that way, the same way that an ape would, or a spider. I don't know that if you wanted to get some emotion from a spider, if you were that little, it was mummy spider and baby spider.
The face and
You
body
know,
language you're giving me right now is priceless.
That's like not...
Pretending to be a spider. You don't even realise you're doing it.
There's no use being a spider, and learning an ape. You'd learn what spiders do, and that's maybe not to do with faces. They're completely different organisms. Completely different.
But do monkeys, do apes, do they have expressions, like secondary emotional expressions, like complex expressions, or is it just...
Well, this is why I think it's so much to do with gaze. It's so much to do with what your eyes are doing when you're looking at nature like in that way. When you're not looking at human societies that live in cities and things like that. When you're looking at in the natural world, it's so much about gaze. It's being communicated because they just don't have words. They don't have any words. And this is kind of why I struggle to reconcile this idea that like without language you can think. Because apes don't have language. They don't have verbal language like we have language. They can make sounds, but they can't form sentences and things like that. But I refuse to believe that they can't think.
Oh no!
It isn't tied with language. So much is to do with the gaze as well.
It's interesting though, because obviously what's happening with that gaze is not the same thing as what would happen with us.
Yes.
So, for example,
it's a completely different social situation.
Yeah, I was telling you about this Derrida paper, which very quickly sort of descends into very long, complex philosophical arguments about metaphysical cats. However, at the beginning, the central point is quite interesting, which is when you're alone and the cat comes in the room and you're standing there stark as, totally naked, and that cat just looks at you. You are inferring all sorts of shameful emotions. You're looking at it going, God, it's judging me. God, look at this shameful, pink, shapeless mass. What's it thinking of me? It must think I'm some kind of shaven baboon that's reared itself with its petty excuse for a
creature.
for sex organ. I mean, it must be, that's what the male's thinking, or very, some males might be thinking. And the cat is just looking. It's probably thinking, it's male. It might not even be thinking that. It might just be thinking, there's my owner. Looks a bit different today. And actually, why? And this is the thing as well. Derrida goes into the whole thing about, why would we think that the animal even recognises that it's belonging to a human? Mm-hmm. It might just be like, oh, here's that distraction, that sideshow again. Here he is. He seems to be standing here without his garb on. We are inferring all sorts of emotions from that gaze.
That's right.
And really, that's a fundamentally human thing. And you could tie that to the Bible. You could tie that and say, well, in Genesis, it's when Adam and Eve realize that they are naked, that they really become human. It's when they realize they're naked and feel shame that they become something fundamentally different to the animal kingdom. Now, that's not an evolutionary argument, but it's an interesting kind of tie into religion there, because that is one of the fundamental differences. I don't know of any animals.
Well, because religions were always written later, it's very, possible that we came to conclusions like that, in the abstract, and then found a way to pen it in. We began to understand what shame, the value of shame to religion was somehow acknowledged, and then it was written in. Okay, they realised they were naked and shameful, because it's all done later.
Having said that, though, I've said that, and again, this is anecdotal, because I know you've done a bit more reading on the evolutionary stuff than I have, but dogs, they know when they're done wrong, and when you come home, are they feeling shame? I think it's different to feeling scared. They don't look scared. You know, when the tail's between their legs and they kind of look at you with those droopy eyes and they know what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
Is that shame?
I don't know. I don't know if that's shame.
I mean, they've got a fully developed limbic system, the emotional center of the brain.
Yeah.
They're very emotionally in touch, those things.
Well, then it very well could be shame. Because as well, I do find studies here that say it isn't just the facial expression, it's also the body language. So it's very possible from a position that a dog is looking at you. You know, it's very often not going to be face to face with you. And actually, you know, if you come across a dog that you don't know and you stand right up to it and you don't get down on its level, much like a child, it might be afraid of you because you're towering right over it. And if you want to make friends with a new dog, it's probably wise to get down on its eye level. Yeah. Much like a child, not scaring a child if you tower over a new baby or a new infant. But if you get down on their level and, you know, lower the eye level, then it kind of helps build that relationship. But a dog's going to see you as the whole. It's going to see your body. It's going to see your face. So it's probably that it's seeing that whole lot altogether. And there are studies that do say that the emotion that you can read from a face is modulated by the gaze, but also by the body language. That comes along with that emotional expression.
That's interesting.
And if those two things don't work, so to move through society, what you're doing is you're building a theory of other people's minds. You're trying to understand their intentions in relation to you, because you want to move through the world uninhibited and fine. And as you build this theory of mind of someone else, that's done through the expression on their face and also the body language that they're using. And if you can't understand what the face is saying, then you generally go off the body language, what the body language is saying. So it's conceivable that if a dog doesn't understand what the face is doing, because humans actually are pretty emotionally complicated compared to, say, a dog, it might go off your body language.
That's true, actually. I'm just thinking, you know, if you took away a face, and actually you could add some sinister, context in there. If you gave someone a ski mask, you could then have them skip. If they were skipping along, you probably wouldn't find them anywhere near as sinister as if they were just walking casually. You know, that's the combination together. That seems very much like duh, but it's an interesting point because you get to this point where it's just such a self-evident point for us. But how did that develop? You know, and that's an almost insurmountable task for a kid to overcome.
Like, say, for example, as well, that you got really good at having a poker face, but you were deeply anxious, right? You had a strong anxiety, but you were perfect at showing on your face normal. Like you're perfectly fine. Like the signals that you're sending are I'm fine, but your body language, your knee might be going. You might be playing with your fingers.
Yeah.
You know, these are all non-facial cues that can tell you a lot about what's going on inside someone. And so maybe that's why we do deflect to the body.
Yeah. I mean, I had I went on this course once, a negotiation course, and this guy, the guy who was running it, fascinating guy, but he studied evolutionary anthropology. And he was an entrepreneur and all this sort of stuff. And he basically had us locked in. Well, not really locked in, but we were in a hotel with this guy for 4 days, 5 days. We were doing these mock negotiations. However, he was filming it. So he was also controlling the camera. And then afterwards, we would go back and we would review it. And it was just fascinating because what he was doing is when we were all reviewing the videos together, is you could see that in the moment, he would zoom in on a part of your body that wasn't doing anything, and then it would tick. And he would keep zooming on different parts because he'd identified a tick that he'd seen when the camera was all the way out. He would go in just before he was anticipating it was going to happen again, and then, just like that, there the tick was. And he had identified all the really idiosyncratic, individualized ticks or tells that each person exhibited. It was really, really odd. I mean, mine was my leg. I had to keep my feet planted firmly on the floor because my leg would go. Or I would then cross my legs, and every time I was challenged or I was going to say something challenging, my foot would kind of like an antenna shoot into the air. And it didn't seem particularly weird when I was doing it in natural conversation. But as soon as you knew that that was an indicator that there was a challenge taking place, and the problem was as well, even when I was trying to seem concessionary, even when I was trying to seem like I was giving way to somebody, actually, the consultant knew it,
Defenses
and I knew
were
it.
going up.
Well, no, what I was doing was I was trying to get something else in there. I was trying to really challenge the person. It was deception, really. I was trying to get them to agree to something that really was in my benefit, but trying to make it look like it was in theirs, and then the foot would shoot into the air, and it was really, really odd. But this guy knew well before it was going to happen where and when you were going to tell, you were going to tick.
Your foot twitch predicts for deception.
Yeah, and so my face was... what he was saying was the feet are the most truthful and the most honest part of the body. Start at the feet. Because they're the ones that go first. They're the furthest away from your brain, and they're the ones that start telling the truth first. I mean, have you ever thought about when you are, when you're looking at a social group, people's attention, you can tell who people are oriented towards.
Yeah, by the feet.
By their feet.
Yeah.
Where are their feet pointed?
Like in golf, you can tell where the ball's going to go depending on where your feet are directed.
Yeah, that might be more of a biomechanical point, but yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting one, and so much information is stored in the body. However, that's what we're talking about here. Is
we're off topic.
We're off topic, but we're not exactly, because what we're saying
is we're an embodied person.
Yeah.
Every little bit of when we're paying attention to something. Obviously, we look at something to pay attention to something, but when we're really engaged with something, we're fully orientated. Our whole body is towards that thing.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing about all of this is that, by saying we're an embodied person, and all of this information is stored in our body language.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't, you have to be aware that, what we're talking about here is if you have a poker face. If you are going to try and keep your face still, it's going to come out somewhere else. However, if you don't bother trying to develop a poker face, if you're not trying to control what's happening on your face, a disproportionate amount of information is going to be stored in your face.
Mm-hmm.
I know they say body language is a huge part of it, but body language is also your face.
Well, when you say you can read someone like a book, you don't mean I can read your chest like a book.
Well, you might do. It depends what the hell I'm doing with it.
But it's interesting, yeah. A lot of it is stored in the body, and I think that's no more clear than them tests they did. Well, not tests, they were more like interesting technological achievements, really, when they put all them points on walking people, and they were able to map just how people walk. A confident person, the confident walk, the depressed
can see the
walk,
gait.
The gait, exactly.
Yeah.
That's very clear. You can tell a depressed person from a walk because those things match up, and that's not in the face. That's just from someone's posture, the way someone moves.
Yeah. But what we need to realize is that body language is kind of, you don't really think about it. Body language is also in the face.
Yeah.
Unless we're going to be really clear.
Because your face is your body as well.
Your face is your body as well. Absolutely.
It's made of muscles, just like your whole body is. You are one organism.
And then, so just to quickly swing this right back around into developmental timelines, what about older age? And there's a really interesting one here. Older adults are less able to recognize negative emotions. So...
Is it because they've had the lot?
Well, this is one of the things. So it's they start to orient. Well, an idea about this is that they start to orient towards positive emotions, start to prioritize those in terms of what they're perceiving, because they've not got a lot of time left. They start saying, well, I've only got so much time to be, perceiving and paying attention. It's an attentional point. So I'm going to pay attention to the good things as opposed to the bad things. Very generalised, because of course you can have an old
very
person
generalised
with depression.
I've met a lot of old knobheads.
Absolutely. But so when you start doing a sample of people, on average, that's the effect you tend to get. So, and the problem is as well, when you compare it to young people, well, young people have a generally lower threshold for perceiving emotions, because they're very sensitive to emotional content. It's really important to them. What's going on, this is a time when they're really focused on whether they're being rejected or accepted in groups, and so their threshold for detecting an emotion is just naturally much lower. They're much more sensitive. Whereas when you're an older adult, that threshold goes up dramatically. And so you stop being able to detect the really, the subtle emotions. And actually maybe it's a point of, if you don't use it, you lose it, because eventually you start to become really, not impaired, but you really don't detect those negative emotions.
Or maybe you just pick up on ones that are particularly negative, the negative ones that are important and need addressing.
Well, I mean, here's an interesting one. So, for example, let's take a sad face, which is shown at 50% intensity, and that 50% intensity is specific to this study, because they did like a sliding scale of the different emotions. But I've seen the faces, and it really is kind of like neutral at 0% all the way up to just the saddest looking face you could imagine. It's kind of like warped all the way through. sad face at 50% intensity is shown, younger adults scored about 4 out of 6 faces correctly, which doesn't really mean anything because what we're saying, it's not a really obviously sad face. But 4 out of 6 correct. But older adults couldn't even get 4 out of 6 correct, even when it was at 100% intensity. And this was a sad-looking face. And at even 100%, they couldn't get 4 out of 6.
Right.
It was 3 out of 6 and below. So it's a significant difference in perceptual ability to pick up negative emotions. So, that comes back to this sort of socio-emotional selectivity theory. These perceived limitations on time means that they're motivated really to orient towards positive emotions.
That really does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And maybe what you say here is that, okay, let's say your ability to detect emotions goes down in general throughout your life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the case, I don't know this, but maybe it's the case that if you attentionally orient towards the positive stuff, if you use it, that's the bit you're using, the positive orientation, you keep it. If you don't use it, you lose it. And that's maybe the negative orientation.
And so, but if you don't use the positive and you lose the positive, that's implying that all that remains is the negative.
Or nothing.
So it's just
I don't know. This study didn't go into that, but that's kind of how I thought about it. I was like, yeah, well, the way you think about it is if you orient towards a positive,
use it or lose it, sister.
You better be positively oriented but that's quite a nice feeling in a way as well. You sort of think,
as we get into our golden years, just life gets better.
Yeah, maybe that's why older people, one of the reasons why older people just don't care about, that they stop becoming so inhibited.
Yeah.
Self-censoring.
Less inhibitions. I'm going to wear the Speedos at the swimming pool.
Yeah. I'm going to say
Despite
what
being,
I think to the shop attendant.
Huge, with the massive beer gut. And
yeah.
I don't care. Deal with the Speedos.
Yeah, because they're not seeing all those. Actually, disgust stays. Disgust as an emotion does stay. It's like
right, but your disgust, the level of disgust with yourself is gone. And rightly so, absolutely rightly so. I can't wait for that time where I get to wear Speedos, and get away with it.
Well, at some point it becomes okay for my body to be this shapeless.
Right,
at the moment,
exactly.
At the moment, it just looks like I'm undisciplined.
Yeah, that's fine. You just wait long enough. Just wait another 20 years, and then you'll grow into yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But getting back to faces, specifically as opposing to bodies, it's interesting.
We keep going down to bodies, don't we?
Yeah, but obviously we are embodied. But I think a good thing to bring us back to the face is this idea of orders of configuration. How we view the bits of the face, really.
Yeah.
And they put them in orders. So there's first order configurations of the face. And this is kind of the specific arrangement of the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the chin, the ears. When you see a face, you expect these things to be in the place they are on every face. You don't expect the eyes to be on the chin and, the mouth to be on the forehead, etc. You expect a face to look the same way or be in the same configuration. That's the first order configuration. The second order configuration is the space between the various features and kind of the features themselves. And these spatial arrangements are unique to everybody. And it's been argued that, primarily it's that, does the configural thing make a face special as opposed to another object? Do we recognize a face, distinguish it better? But recognizing an individual from another individual, one face from another, it's been argued is down to these featural aspects of the face. It allows for differentiation between different people. And the idea is that you build a holistic picture of the face. So you don't just see the eyes independently, you don't just see the nose independently. Everything gets stuck together. All these different bits get stuck together.
And debate a topic we'll come on to later. Some people can't see holistically and they are blind to perceiving faces. So they cannot see faces. They cannot perceive, I should say. They can't perceive faces. So that's debate something that's coming later. But yes.
Well, I mean, I'm quite happy to do that now. But there are a couple of things that screw with that. Like the inversion effect.
Yeah.
So the thing is when we see a face, we always expect to see it in the context of a face. It's not just space and then just
not
eyes.
possible.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not possible.
Not like Picasso.
We always see it in the context of a face. But things like the inversion effect and the composite effect can really screw with that, especially when it comes to recognition.
So the inversion effect, you turn it upside down.
Yeah, you turn it upside down, and what you do is you manipulate the image. So you take the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and you flip those upside down.
Well, this is to show the inversion effect.
That's sure the
and
inversion effect.
difference.
But what you do is then you turn that whole image upside down.
Yeah.
And then you look at that upside down picture. And we'll have an example, actually, that Matthew got. Matthew put it together.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that, actually? Because that's a good thing.
I made one. I
It proves
made
his point, actually, pretty well.
Yeah, so if you go to our Instagram or our Facebook or even our Twitter, you'll see this video promoting this particular episode. And in it, there's a spinning face. And you'll very quickly see that it's not very offensive when it's upside down. Because if you look, and you'll see this almost immediately, the features are turned back around the right way. So I've photoshopped it so that it looks... I mean, it's photoshopped to the point where you can't tell, really, they've been turned around. You know, there's no kind of glitches. Or
It's
no
the freckles. The freckles are seamless.
I'm going to go and change the freckles. I'm going to go and... I was really pleased with that, you know. I put the shadow back into the nose.
No, it was good. That's what I mean. It's like the freckles blended in so they don't make it so noticeable.
But it's weird because as soon as it turns back around, as soon as that face orients the normal way around, chin at the bottom, forehead at the top, and you notice that I've turned the eyes upside down and the eyebrows, and actually what they don't normally do is they don't normally turn the nose upside down. I mean, I've turned the nose upside down, the mouth upside down as well. You'll notice that when that reveals itself as something that's been tampered with, it's quite offensive to look at.
Yeah, it's so hideously abnormal.
Yes.
That you're like, how did I not notice that?
No, you don't really notice
when it was upside down.
And when it is upside down, I've shown this to a few people and they've said, oh, well, I can see the nose. And because I've said it, now that if you go and look at it, you'll know going in. But when you look at it, it doesn't feel that offensive. When you see it, and you see the nose is upside down, you see the eyes are upside down and the lips when the face is inverted, but the features are flipped. And you kind of go, oh, well, I can see it's wrong, but it doesn't feel wrong. And then it turns and you go, whoa, what?
And it's an interesting little trick because, again, it comes down to context. Just like you expect to see the first order configuration in the context of a face, you also expect to see them faces the right way up. You don't generally walk through society with half of society floating upside down where you see their faces. So you're really kind of geared and educated to gravity. You know, gravity keeps us all the right way around and keeps us all looking at a face in a certain way.
Pulls our mouth lower.
Right.
Our eyes are lighter.
Yeah.
I'm lying, but yeah.
But it's that a face should look a completely certain way.
Mm.
And it absolutely, the eyes, even though it's so abnormal, even though everywhere's in exactly the right place.
And so if we talk about the inversion effect more broadly, if you don't mess with the features, and if you just turn faces upside down, it becomes overwhelmingly or disproportionately harder to recognize faces.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to show this, like just by saying, go and turn a picture upside down.
Well, the thing is, it's like, yeah, you just have to take our word for it. If you have, or you can do it, actually,
you can
but
go
you
and
need
see
somebody,
these trials.
get your friend to get a picture of a celebrity that you know, or like 10 celebrities you know.
Yeah.
And get them to turn all those pictures upside down and get them to give you like 3 seconds looking at a picture, right?
Yeah.
And then try and say who it is.
Yeah.
And see whether you get it or not
It'll
in them
be
3 seconds.
far harder, and you'll be far slower when it's upside down.
Exactly.
And the reason is, or it's thought that the reason is because there's a fundamentally different part of your brain that processes faces and that processes objects.
Right.
And actually even that processes places, interestingly. But yeah, there's a place that's specialised in your brain for processing faces.
So this is to say, if I took a picture of a chair and I turned that chair upside down, there'd be very, very little difference in the amount of time it took for you to recognise that's a chair, even if it was upside down or right way up.
Exactly. And you still recognise it's a face, but you wouldn't be able to recognise which face.
Yeah.
And that's because we have developed specific structural parts of our brain. And there's an interesting point here. We talked about the developmental timeline, and actually when you're first born, it's still there. You still have this part of your brain, which we'll come on to, but it's not being overwhelmingly utilised at birth. And what you see as you go through childhood, actually, by the time you get to about 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, you've got a fusiform face area, which is the part of the brain we're talking about. You've got a fusiform face area in your brain that's about a third of the size of an adult's. So it starts to, proportionally, obviously your head's smaller, but it starts to basically develop and specialise over time. But the structure is there in the first place. It's there and it's ready to be utilised.
It's been argued in the past that it's just an area for specialism, but recent reviews do say it is specifically for faces, this area of the brain.
Yeah, so you get a lot of these. You get a lot of. I mean, we've seen it ourselves with the lecturers talking about the fact it's an expertise area, and this is based on largely on studies that were done on dogs and birds, like bird watchers and things like this. And I mean, yeah, interesting, but they didn't replicate. So it was shown that this area would light up when bird watchers looked at birds. And you say, oh, is it an expertise thing? When a person looks at cars and they're recognizing which car. It didn't replicate. This stuff hasn't replicated over time. And as we've got better and better at, well, basically as our neuroimaging technology has gotten better, we've been able to measure the brain in, finer or in a higher resolution, in more fidelity. And there's actually there's a part right next to the fusiform face area, which is highly responsive to objects. Mm-hmm. And actually, when you pass those two things out, you suddenly find that there's a face effect and an object effect. So the fusiform face area, this is the part that we're talking about with faces, that is not responsive to expertise effects, or at least the current research shows that.
There can be, it's obvious that this would get confused because... Yeah. Obviously, an ERP is going to show up in a very similar area to where you're getting visual stimuli in the brain. If information is coming in, your occipital cortex is firing, then it makes sense that faces will be around there just like objects will be around there.
And when we talk about ERPs, we're talking about an electrical deflection, essentially.
That's right.
So it's very non-specific.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just sort of reflecting. It's not reflecting, but it's a huge effect area in comparison to what we're able to do with some of the more advanced regions of interest and fMRI scanning techniques.
Because as well, and then it would also make sense that we do have a specific one, because if not, then why this diversion from ape faces and human faces? Why species specialism is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah. When you perceptually narrow,
why the perceptual narrowing? Yeah, it does make sense that there would be a specific place in the brain that's very close to where objects are, but that is specific for our faces.
Yeah. And that area right next door, if anyone wants to look at it, is the lateral occipital area. But it's not the place we thought it was. Other studies have shown, the FFA, the fusiform face area, responding to bodies as well. Mm-hmm. Again, the same problem. There's a fusiform body area. So if you can really box off, and when I say box off, we use what's called voxels, a bit like in Minecraft cubes.
Astras.
Pardon?
Voxel astras.
Voxels. A bit like in Minecraft cubes.
Right.
If you can get those cubes small enough, you can really start picking out and you can really start identifying the fusiform face area as distinct from these other areas. And so the current research, because it's always open to reinterpretation and new information, but it is that it's a face area. And one of the things that came up quite interestingly is, why would it be that we can recognize a caricature? And this is a really interesting point, especially when we come back onto face blindness, but this is a point that we say, well, how do we recognize faces? One of the prevailing theories, and one that I think is fairly robust, is norm-based coding. It's how different from the norm, from the average face, is a given person's face. Which is why when you are face blind, it's very, very difficult to recognize average faces, because they're so similar to the norm. Whereas if you think about a caricature, well, it's almost more identifiable, more recognizable.
Because it picks up on all these features, specific features.
Exactly. The eyebrows are higher, the nose is bigger, the lips are droopier.
Yeah.
Yeah? So this norm-based coding idea is this is one theory as to how the fusiform face area is basically identifying faces. Because this area really is for recognition. There are other areas. We should say that there's a whole bunch of different areas that are doing all sorts of different things. But for recognition, it's this. It's the fusiform face area. Because there's all sorts of different pathways that are strung through your brain. I mean, we are really it's quite interesting. So you sort of think, well, let's start at the eye. How do you see? Because you just talked about gaze. But how do you see a face? I mean, there's light. It's hitting the retina. And actually, if anyone wants to look this up, it's 2.5D. We don't see in 3D. We hallucinate the third dimension. It's 2.5D. It's all sort of parallax, and you're overlaying two 2D images because it's a retina and it's flat or it's curved, but it's 2D images. You start there. half of your visual field crosses over to the other side. The other half of your visual field stays on the same side. It shoots through to the back of your head. So this information has been transduced, converted from light into an electrical stimulus, which is actually in your retina, it's under a layer of cells, which is a weird one for me. I always sort of think, well, it feels like, the rods and cones at the back of your eye, they're on the surface of the back of your eye. No, they're under a layer of cells. That's converting light into energy. It's shooting back into the back of your head. It hits the occipital
It's
cortex.
like in a camera, there's a sensor.
Yeah.
Then you've got, your rods and cones are effectively like beneath this sensor. They're the ones that's sending all the information through. Light's hitting this thing.
Yeah.
And then the rods and cones are saying, is it light? Is it dark? What's going on?
Yeah.
And that's what's traveling through.
And it shoots to the back of your head into the occipital cortex, where there's multiple layers of this. Initially it's looking for edge detection, and it's great. I mean, some of the it's arranged in a way that's too complex to kind of explain over a podcast, but they're called blobs. All these Latin terms, and one guy was like, what we're going to call these blobs, the way this is organised. It's incredible. But yeah, it's proliferating up through multiple layers of visual cortex, looking for edges and then higher order configurations, putting all of this information together. And then it's really shooting off. It's like if you look at the connections that comes out of the visual cortices, the layer 1 and layer 2, it's like a spaghetti shotgun. It fires out into multiple different areas of the brain, 2 of which are the posterior, so the rear fusiform face area, and the medial, so the middle part of the fusiform face area. But it's just a shotgun of this spaghetti connections. And then you've also got in there from the fusiform face area, and this is all really, if you think about it, it's gone to the back and now it's shooting around the sides. There's also a corridor that goes up into a different area, and then back down, which is responsible for top-down attentional control. So you've got this up and down sort of spaghetti connection of neurons that's in here as well. It's then shooting even further into the side of your head, past your ears, into the anterior temporal lobe, which is kind of the front of the sides. And there's a lot of redundant connections in there, which means that you can start severing connections in this part of the brain. You can even actually sever them really early on, just past the visual cortex, because there's so many redundant, because it's like this shotgun of spaghetti that goes out into the side of your brain. You can sever parts of it, and the downstream effect is really, it's not as bad as you might imagine it would be. You can still recognize faces. Why would that be? Because it's really bloody important to be able to recognize faces. Evolutionarily, it's probably the case that we've evolved a lot of redundant connections in there. We've evolved to be able to take a lot of damage to that part of the brain and still be able to recognize faces. I thought that was a really interesting area. And then right there, next to the fusiform face area, you've got the parahippocampal place area, which seems really odd, but it's faces and places right there. Faces and places right next to each other. They look like the same connections. It's only when you color code them you see they're different. Doing the same thing, shooting around the sides. So you're sitting across from me. The light is shot into my eye, to the back of my head, and has been shotgunned back around the side into a number of different places, into the side of my brain, into the temporal lobes. And there's a lot of redundancy there.
Yeah, but there's also a lot more than my face in what you're seeing.
A lot more. And that's that bit.
That's the thing.
The attentional control bit that I just spoke about that is kind of a corridor up and down.
It's got to give you everything to allow you to figure out what's important. What should I be looking at? But it's got to come in. It can't decide for you what's important in a way.
Yeah.
You eventually attend.
Yes, it's a lot of connections that you don't. You've got more connections than you need, basically. So it's actually further upstream. It's once you have...
Than the initial onset.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff that goes in there.
Yeah.
But it's further upstream. When you're looking at faces and recognizing faces, you can sever all sorts of connections, and you're still going to recognize faces. Unless there's... And this is one thing about the brain. If people haven't done psychology, you can think about it as there are city centers and highways. Yeah, what we're talking about here is if you sever highways, it'll find another highway. There's a lot of highways into the city center. The city center in this case is the fusiform face area.
Yeah.
That's where they're doing all.
But if you chop off the
processing.
highway, you can still exist within the fusiform, within the city, if you already live there.
Well, there's a weird one. You might get into there on a non-conscious highway. If you cut the fusiform face area in half, if you bomb the city, that's a whole different story. That's when you get the pathology.
Okay.
But if you there's so many highways into the city that you cut one. Oh. Pardon me. That's my iWatch, my Apple Watch.
Fucking iWatches,
Just said
man. I hate
hello.
these fucking things.
Yeah, I know.
What's it talking to you for?
It transcribed a whole load of what I just said.
That's terrifying,
Yeah,
man.
no, I know. Actually, it's interesting. Just to go slightly off topic, if you look at your, if you've got an Android, which this is, you can go onto your Google account because of GDPR.
Right.
You can see exactly. You can see all the audio files of the times they've recorded you. There's some weird ones. It's thought I've said something to do with Google in the middle of the night, and you hear me snoring, or you just hear me pottering around or talking to somebody. It's really odd.
Man.
Yeah.
I don't know why you'd have that thing strapped to your wrist.
No,
You've got to be absolutely insane.
Yeah,
but it's
well,
interesting what you were talking about, because that we have this place that despite damage, you know, we can still learn about faces. We can also understand what's going on in a face when we're not looking directly at it. There's a study that I found that what they did was they got people to look at pictures of angry faces and happy faces, and what they did was and fearful faces.
Yeah.
And what they did was they intersperse these with like mangled faces, like ones that are all blocked up and made weird.
Oh yeah.
And what they did was they looked at the difference between averted gaze and direct gaze. Now, when I say that, when I'm talking direct gaze, I don't mean the person who's looking at the image in the study is looking directly at the screen. Right? I'm talking about the person in the picture that you're looking at is looking directly at the screen or at the lens, right?
Okay.
And when it's averted gaze, the person in the picture is looking away from the camera when they took a picture of their face. And what they did was they looked across this particular paper looked at happy, sad and fearful faces. And in a direct gaze, they found really no difference between the signals that you were picking up with happy and sad, right? But with fearful faces, it was almost the exact opposite. You picked up more information on a fearful face, or the signal was strongest when you saw it in an averted gaze.
Okay. It's looking for danger, maybe.
Like if someone's looking away from you, it doesn't make sense for you to look directly at them, because you use this shared peripheral vision to seek out some kind of danger. But what it does, and that's what it is. It's this idea of a shared signal.
Well, that's it. You also use your own face as a benchmark as well.
Yeah, that's it. And there have actually been studies about people who looked at sports players, and they measured these emotions by looking at all the various different muscle contractions and stuff like that when you were looking at these emotions of sports players.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's, that's another interesting thing. But really interesting is people who are just able to remember faces.
Super
recognizers.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually what they're called.
I like to think I never forget a face, but compared to these people, like, I don't know anything about faces.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we'll put a link in the description to some validated tests. The University of Greenwich, there's a guy there, Josh Davis, I believe his name is. He essentially specialises in this. Yeah, Josh P. Davis. And he has these 3 tests on there. There's actually a first one, and there's 3. The first one, I got 13 out of 14. I thought, I'm going to be world class at this. Turns out I'm worse than average. When you go through the other 3, I came below the 50th percentile. And I actually thought throughout the whole thing, I thought, I am world class at this.
Do you know what I look like right now? Can you?
Hopefully I'll remember later. But this is it, and this is actually one of the things, because it's such a finely attuned system, everything we've spoken about. You know, the fusiform face area, the specific part of your brain, it's so finely attuned that really we're all specialists at face detection. However, some people, they really max it out. So you remember the London riots?
Yeah.
In 2011. So the the Metropolitan Police. God, got that wrong, didn't I?
Did it rain that day? No, it was hot.
They were seeing faces in the clouds everywhere on one day. No, so the Metropolitan Police, they instigated Operation Withen. And so there was 5,000 rioters charged, but 4,000 of those came from CCTV. And a disproportionate number of the people identified were identified by a few super recognizers. So one guy identified 180 people. And you might think, well, because the 4,000 is quite a lot, and there's not that many super recognizers. You might think, well, 180 people, how many super recognizers are there? What it was is that there were a few police that were able to they were so familiar with the offenders that they could recognize a lot of people. But there were super recognizers, and one of them could, he spotted 180 people. You might think, well, was he really familiar with them? No. These were people he'd seen on a database from years ago. And he said, aha. And these people on CCTV, we're not talking about HD CCTV. when you look at the footage they're reviewing, it's grainy, it's dark, they're wearing hoodies, they're disguised, and they're looking at like some side profile of somebody who's obscured with their face covered, and they're going, it's that guy I saw on the database a couple of years ago. And you go, yeah, that's something else. And of course, they're proved right. It's not like they go, we'll take his word for it. Because they're going out and looking for the evidence.
Yeah, because I was going to ask
that.
you, like, what about like biases?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, this is it. So, whenever this is given to a constituency, the different police departments that deal with it, it's provided with error rates. So they're advised that this isn't the gospel. However, what was happening is the police were then going, okay, so you think it's X person, so we're going to go and look for evidence. And you might say, well, that's just a bias. But what they were doing was that they were testing this with the super recognizers. So in 2015, the Metropolitan Police set up a specialist unit called the Proactive Super Recognizer Units. I know.
So it's like a Marvel comic.
It sounds like the men who stare at goats from the US program, the psychics. They set this up, and they were making hundreds of identifications every year. And it was going really, really well. And actually, there were some studies that were done on this particular unit where they took a guy in the 1970s. A guy went missing, and there was also maybe 5 days later, there was a guy who was dragged out of one of the rivers in London, not the Thames, but one of the peripheral rivers. And they took a control group, and they said, okay, here's a lineup of different people. Here's a number of different pictures of different people. And in there was a picture, like a really old, grainy picture, because that's all they had of this guy, of the person who went missing. And here's a picture of the body, the post-mortem. And they weren't really able to match it. But all the super recognizers disproportionately picked one, and they were matching it to it. And it was the guy who went missing maybe 5 days before this particular body was recovered from one of the rivers. And it just... All the evidence was corroborating, and it was essentially said that it was highly likely that this was the same person. They couldn't prove it, but when you did it against a control group, they were all picking this one guy, and so they were also utilized in post-mortem analysis, because of course the family couldn't recognize a very bloated corpse, or cadaver, I should say. They are extremely good, even when there's been significant deformation to the face.
And they use their opinion against like the opinions of another group of people.
Another group of people who weren't super recognized.
Because that's what they do in eyewitness testimony too.
Right.
Eyewitness testimony gets better the more people that corroborate it.
Yes.
And also, and as well, like you actually as a person, even though you might not have seen that face, you're actually more likely to agree that is a face if lots of people do agree.
Yeah. So this has been tested for super recognizers, and that 2015 team isn't currently. So that was used for going back over old cases. So they've been disbanded now, but they're still within the police force. They're still doing their jobs. They're still being utilized as super recognizers. So if you see an obscured CCTV camera that you think it can't possibly know, I've got my hood up, and you're listening to this, someone can work out who you are, and you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised because when you do these tests, do them, and when you're looking at some of these pictures, they're basically just noise, like the noise on a black and white TV, on a TV when it goes black and white dots. It's like visual noise. You kind of go, there's no face in there, or there's maybe an eye socket or two. People can recognize, they can identify particular faces from this. I mean, I have absolutely no clue how that's possible. Yeah, from a subjective first person perspective, incredible, absolutely incredible. But
that's crazy. I feel like we're going like down this unbreakable road whereby there are people who are super recognizers, but then there are people who just can't see faces at all.
Yeah, well, one last point on the super recognizers is you might think, oh yeah, well there's these facial recognition technologies, they must be much better. The facial recognition technology, when that guy did 180 for the riots, the facial recognition technology did 1. So that's how good you can get.
That was quite well documented in newspapers though as well, wasn't it? Like how useless their facial recognition technology is. It kind of came out that it was kind of rubbish, and that the police had been using all these technological techniques to recognize people, and they were actually wrong. And it did come out that there was I I'd have to find the news article again. I've not looked at it, but you just reminded me there were news articles around that time that came out that this technology wasn't very good, recognising faces.
Yeah, and apparently it was cutting edge at the time. So that's how good it can get. But yeah, what about people that are blind or face blind? And actually, if you haven't read anything by Oliver Sacks, you've got to go and read it. He's basically done case histories on his... So he's a neurologist. And he has these case histories of his patients, the ones that agree to have these case histories published. He was in a lot of
people, just to clear up who Oliver Sacks is, a lot of people who don't know him from his literature, they'll probably know him from the movie Awakenings with Robin Williams and Robert De Niro.
And De Niro, yeah. And that's a brilliant film.
Amazing film.
But that's about L-Dopa. When he started giving L-Dopa to people, and they were inert, they really were sort of locked in their own bodies, and they started essentially coming alive or awakening. That's this guy. But he wrote this book called... it's a very well-known book. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
Yeah.
You'll see it on bookshelves.
Yeah.
You've got to
I think I bought it from HMV when HMV was still going.
Did you?
Yeah, a Fob or somewhere.
Yeah, really, really good. But in one of the case histories in there is of Dr. P, who was a musician. So Dr. PhD, I assume. Dr. P is the guy. And he was known as a singer and then as a teacher. He taught at a music school. And initially, he was just having trouble recognizing his students by their faces. I mean, the voices were fine, but the faces were a bit of an issue. But water hydrants and parking meters, they sort of started looking like children, and he was seeing sort of faces appearing in things, and it was all a bit odd. His musical abilities were fine. He felt better than ever as far as he was concerned, and, he actually just thought these mistakes are so ludicrous that they can't be serious. He was like, it's just, I'm an artistic person. It's all a bit weird, whatever. Anyway, 3 years later, he developed diabetes, and of course diabetes can mess with your eyes. And so he went to an ophthalmologist, an eye doctor, and they said, there's nothing wrong with your eyes, but you need to see a neurologist. And he was all a little bit kind of like, yeah, okay, a neurologist, fine. So he went and saw Dr. Sacks, or Oliver Sacks. And this guy, Dr. P, he wasn't really aware anything was the matter. Dr. Sacks said he's a very cultivated man. He writes beautifully about him in the book. How he's sitting there looking out the window, commenting on the street below, and maybe this man will let me do a neurological examination on him. Oh, he's such a cultivated man. I mean, it's very well written. But basically, he carries out this very standard neurological examination. Testing your reflexes, and one of them you might have seen is when you take your shoe off and they take a key and they run a key under your foot, and your foot kind of curls. And he did that. Obviously, the shoe had to come off for that. And afterwards, Dr. P hadn't put his shoes back on. And Oliver Sacks looks at him and he says, feel free to put your shoes back on. He goes, oh, they are on. What do you mean? He was kind of, bewildered by all of this. And he says, no. That's your shoe's there. It's not on. And he goes, no, this is my shoe. And he points to his foot. He goes, my shoe's on. And he's pointing at his sock, essentially, on his foot. And Sacks says, no. That's your shoe. That's your foot. And Dr. P goes, what? Oh, gosh. Sorry. Yeah, no. Of course. I thought that was my foot. And points at the shoe across the room. Yeah, so, I mean, it's such a deep level of perceptual pathology that he didn't even realise. I mean, you and me, if we saw our foot on the other side of the room, would be
what did he think he was doing? He was taking his foot off.
Yeah, he was just kind of confused about the whole thing. He was just like, oh, okay. Anyway, Dr. Sacks then says, one thing he tends to do is, well, actually, before we get to that, he then opened the National Geographic magazine, and he started taking him through pictures and asking him to describe what he was seeing, and he was picking out these like small particular details, sort of, commenting on really specific parts of the picture, but he never really described, like we said, holistically. He never holistically processed the scene. And so, on the last picture, it was the Sahara Desert, and it was literally like just sand. And he was asked to describe it, and Dr. P said he was looking at a river with a little guest house and a terrace going out onto the water, on which people were dining on it, and there were coloured parasols. And Dr. Sacks looks up at him as if to say, "What the heck?" And the guy's not even looking at the picture; he's looking just off into the distance. And that's when he knew something was a bit amiss. And anyway, Dr. P kind of looked at him, seemed quite pleased with himself. He didn't seem to read the fact that Oliver Sacks's face was kind of agape, kind of really confused. Anyway, he seemed to think at that point the examination was over, went to get his hat, walked over to his wife, grabbed her head, tries to yank her head off. He goes, oh, sorry, I thought it was a hat. Hence the name of this case study. But anyway, he then goes to his home, and he goes to his home, because this is the great thing about Sachs. He always says, well, there's the lab, or there's the clinic, I should say. There's the clinic, that's fine, but it's not what in science...
It's not reality.
It's not what we'd call in science ecologically valid.
Yeah.
In psychology. It's not valid, it's not ecologically valid, it's not real.
It's not the situation in its natural habitat. It's under controlled conditions.
Exactly. So he always goes to their homes, or usually goes to their homes, which is great. And he's at his home, and he starts bringing out what you call platonic solids. So like the forms of cubes, tetrahedrons, and Dr. P was sort of saying, yes, I recognise these, all fine. And he was identifying playing cards, not a problem. Cartoons. The actors on the TV were a bit of a problem, but I can barely recognise actors on TV. But then I'm probably not a great case example. But the emotions were a bit of an issue for him. And then it became really quite tragic. So Oliver Sacks talks about how he went around the room and started collecting up these photos that were on the walls, on the cabinets, brings them over to Dr. P and starts saying, okay, do you recognise these people? And he just couldn't. It was a real problem for him. I mean, there was one picture in there that was of Einstein. He went, the hair and the hair gave it away, like the clear, obvious feature.
Featural issue.
Yeah. So bring it back to the norm-based coding, like the caricature. If one feature is so obvious, they look at the feature and go, yes. However, he was looking at his brother.
Yeah, that bald head and hair
Yeah.
of Einstein has almost become synonymous with a scientist.
Yeah.
If you draw a cartoon of a scientist, they have those features.
Yeah, the mad scientist
Yeah.
always has that particular hairstyle.
That's it.
But he also exclaimed, Paul, when seeing his brother, but it took him a while, because there was that kind of reaction, that the aha moment, because he identified by the square jaw and the teeth. And actually, the whole thing was quite tragic, because this was all his family and his old colleagues and friends, and he couldn't get it. And he said the whole thing was almost like an exam for him. It was almost like a test. He was looking at these faces, and it was almost like, I'm going to work out who these people are. I'm gonna figure this out. It's not like, there's the picture of my wife. I remember my wife. It wasn't that. It was like an examination. And then it got really weird. Oliver Sacks, bit of a flamboyant kind of quirky guy, on the way there, he'd gone to the florist, bought a great big red rose, whacked it in his pocket, in his pocket, where a pocket square would be, in his jacket pocket, and he pulls it out, gives it to Dr. P and says, what's this? And the guy looks at him, and he says, well, it's a convoluted red form with a linear green attachment.
A convoluted red form with a linear green attachment.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if that was in the sales description of the pocket square?
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, so this is a point that Sacks makes, because Sacks makes the point that, you'd never be able to get a child to say those words.
No.
But a child will go, what's a rose?
It's so
see it
interesting, 'cause it's
immediately.
almost like this guy's picking up on all the individual features that make up that holistic whole, but he's not able to mesh them all together to make that one unit.
Yeah.
And attach that to a word in his brain for it.
Yeah. And it's so in this case, it's not just the fusiform face area. It's a bit broader than that, because it's objects as well. And funnily enough, Sacks then says, okay, that's the description, but what is it? And the guy just is totally bewildered by it. And Sacks says, smell it. And he smells it, and immediately another aha moment. He goes, it's a rose. And he's a musical guy. And so he starts singing some song about a rose and says how beautiful it is. So with some additional context, non-visual context, he can recognise it. And he then gives it a glove. And this is the one that Sacks always talks about with the glove. He says, what's this? And the guy's totally unsure what this thing is, this glove. And he goes, it's a continuous surface infolded on itself. It appears to have 5 outpoachings, if that is the word for it. And then he says maybe it's a container of some sort. There are many possibilities. It could be a change purse, for example, for coins of 5 sizes. And then Sacks is like, well, could it fit a part of your body? And the guy's like, I'm not really sure. And eventually he accidentally gets it on his hand, and he goes, my God, it's a glove. Because he really is just not able to perceive it. We call this visual agnosia. He's just not able to understand what it is he's seeing. And he later found out that, this is an interesting point, he found out that Dr. P wasn't just a musician, he was also a painter. And there was there's a wall where chronologically you can see his paintings along the wall from the early days to more recently, and it kind of gets more and more abstract as you go along. There's a bit of a cubist bit in the middle, and then it goes towards, something totally nonsensical and unintelligible at the end, sort of random lines. And he says this to the wife, and the wife says, well, it's artistic development. And he's a little bit like, okay, fine. But he's thinking to himself, yeah, there's an interesting point. At what point is it artistic development, and at what point is it
the beginning
pathology?
Of this pathology? Yeah.
Yeah. At the end, he says it's definitely pathology, but at some point in the middle, there's clearly some creative fuel that comes from this. At this point, you call it pathology, from this visual agnosia, but it's clearly creating a lot of different connections because he can't use the same ones he was before, and it's very visually abstracted in a really interesting and artistic way. The good with the bad.
That is fascinating. I need to pull that book.
It's really good.
Box. It's one of those ones I bought because it was £1.50 on the stand while I was buying my action DVDs or whatever it was back in the day.
It was £1.50.
Oh yeah, it was super cheap.
Wow.
Yeah, I bought a couple, but they always just kind of stayed there on the shelf to make me look cool rather than reading them. So what I've got to do is actually get down and read.
You got to read it. I mean, it's you can actually get it online, that particular case study for free. You can, if you Google it, it will be online. So no excuses. You've got to read it because it's beautifully written.
Yeah.
What I've just gone through doesn't do it justice. And there's another book he's written, The Mind's Eye, where he talks about his own face blindness because he is not quite to the same extent. But he can recognise his wife and his family, his immediate family. But
I thought he was gay.
I think he is as well. Yeah, but to be gay and face blind, they're not mutually exclusive.
Oh no, but he said he could recognise his wife.
Oh, hold on, is he gay? Right, clip this if he's not.
I thought he was gay. Yeah. No, we'll look for that later. It
we'll
doesn't matter. It's completely
no, because if he's gay, we need to clip this entire section.
Yeah, exactly, because obviously his homosexuality meant that he wasn't thinking clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. No. In fact, if anything, that's better.
So that's interesting because this face blindness, it also has a big posh word, doesn't it? It has it's
prosopagnosia.
Prosopagnosia.
Yeah. Exactly.
Putting it in a form of agnosia.
Yeah, but there's a different part of the brain that processes the lips and the nose and the edges, right? So you can still see the face. So we say it's prosopagnosia and it's face blindness. You can still see it. But what we're doing, like you were saying a minute ago, is we're not seeing the holistic whole of the face. We're seeing the featural parts. And one of the best pieces, this is really the seminal piece in the fusiform face area literature. It's Joseph Parvisi in 2012. He was doing some deep brain stimulation for a patient. So there was a 45-year-old man. And this really proves the point about the fusiform face area and the fact it's just the face. A 45-year-old man was implanted with intracranial electrodes.
What for? What was he being treated for?
It was seizures. So there was some medication-resistant seizures, and it was deep brain stimulation.
Yeah. What for, like epilepsy or for? Okay.
And it happened to be that it was in the medial and posterior fusiform face area.
All right. Okay, that's where the focus was.
Yeah, and so that's exactly where these electrodes went, very specifically into these two areas. And he agreed to take part in an experiment where he had it overstimulated. And so it was between 2 and 4 milliamps of electricity was put into that part of the brain. And it's an interesting point because the fusiform face area grows slightly differently in everyone. And there are some techniques now where you essentially have to really localize parts of an individual's brain. So this isn't something you can do with 40, 50, 60 people because you have to go through extensive tests to say, okay, the fusiform face area has developed slightly differently in this person, and we can functionally localize it.
Well, there has to also be reason. There needs to be a reason to look at this person's brain to think that we need to look at this area. Yeah,
certainly
exactly.
For this.
You can't just drag in 100 people and start
deep brain stimulate them.
Expensive,
No. I mean, you could do an fMRI, but this is the point. You have to still functionally localize it, and it's a really intensive process. And that's what they did with him, because of course, like you say, there was a reason they had to get it right, because it was for the seizures. And basically, they during the stimulation, there's a video of it, fantastic video. We'll put it in the description. The patient is essentially looking at Dr. Parvisi, and when it's stimulated, this part of his brain is stimulated, you can see his face just lights up. He kind of smiles because he's just totally bewildered by what he's seen. And he goes, your face just totally changed. he says, you know, the features hadn't really got larger or smaller, but they started drooping, shifting to the left. You know, his nose was lower, and he kept saying, "You look like someone I know." Like when it's on, when you're stimulating that part of my brain, your face just changes, it warps. You look like someone I know, but it's not you. I might say that person has the same eyes as you, but it's not you. Your face changes, and the same thing happens if they bring a female nurse, and he goes, "Okay, look at her," and he goes, "Oh, yeah, her whole kind of lower face apparently shifts upwards." And he goes, "Oh, it wasn't pretty." You know, he was just like that. With her, it was a really negative effect. He goes, "Yeah, your face is totally warped." But then he was also told to look around the room like a TV and a balloon, and you know, no problems. I mean, he did say something seemed a little bit off. Something seemed wrong, but you couldn't tell exactly what it was. And actually, there are some technical reasons why this might be a bit of overstimulation in a certain area where they couldn't exactly localize it. But really, he's like, yeah, fine. It's not the room. In fact, he can even read writing on a balloon. They wrote something on a balloon. He goes, "Oh, it's fine."
It was just the face.
Just the face.
Just the face.
Because Dr. Parvizi goes, you know, "Well, could you still tell I was a man?"
Yeah.
He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, how?" He goes, "Well, you were still in the suit and
So
tie."
that's fascinating. They drill into this dude's brain. They put in the electrode, whatever they're going to do. They presumably, I don't know, what they affect it, they heat it up, they do whatever
Well,
they're going to do.
they stimulate it with electric.
Stimulate it with electrode. And then, nothing but the guy's face warps.
Nothing. You know, down to the collar. The collar's the same
Not
with the
even
suit.
like there'd be like a square in the if you were to split your vision into a frame like a movie. You know, it wouldn't even be like one side of the frame droops.
No, it's
you know,
just the face.
Specifically
The face. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
nuts.
And that's the kill shot.
That is nuts.
On the fact that is a face-specific area. That is it. You can make someone's face melt. Thanks for listening to Abstracts. Our theme tune is Coffee by Cambo. You can find this track on the Free Music Archives and the link in the description, where you'll also find links to the video sample in the introduction. If you're looking for a full list of references used in this episode, you can find them on our website at www.abstractspodcast.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter, which you will find linked in the description. Finally, if you want to get in touch and put us right, then you can send us an email via the website, or you can slip into our DMs on social media. Thanks for listening to the Abstracts podcast, and see you next time.